All right, good morning.
Good morning.
So it's great to be back here with you. And we're going to talk a little bit later on about the Gatha Anopini Sutra. I was away in Colorado last week visiting my brother and sister-in-law, and we actually didn't think we were going to make it initially because there's a lot of wildfires. There was some serious wildfires going on in Colorado. And there was a lot of smoke as a result of those wildfires, as well as, all the other things that happen, evacuations, closing down of airports and all of that. But fortunately we were able to get out there. I was there, and I was having a conversation with a woman, and we were talking about the wildfires, and we were talking about the people who are engaged in putting out those wildfires, and we were talking about the tremendous sacrifice, right, of these people, the bravery that they have, and to go into the heart of these things and try to stop them in order to save lives and property and everything else. So in the course of that discussion, I made the mental error of saying, yeah, those guys who do that are amazing. And then she quickly pointed out to me, she goes, well, there's a lot of women firefighters too. And I acknowledged that. I said, yeah, you're right. There's a lot of, thank both the men and the women who are engaged in that sort of work.
You got woke.
I did get woke. So anyway, I had said we were going to talk about, so there were 6 paramitas. Remember, we talked about the 6 paramitas, and the 6 paramitas, which are part of the Bodhisattva path. And, the Bodhisattva path is sort of the path of trying to become a better person and to remain present. In sort of the Buddhist teachings, the Bodhisattva is, like the Kuan Yin statue here, right? Kuan Yin is the Bodhisattva of compassion. And when we do the Heart Sutra, my God, she lost her hand. Okay, well, anyway. But, okay, well, it can be fixed. We can fix the Bodhisattva. Unless she's giving me this for some reason to help out. But in any event, in the tradition, the Bodhisattva, is some mythical being who has achieved awakening and have decided that they're not going to disappear from the earth, and but they'll stay here to help people, achieve awakening, become better people, so to speak. So that's so there are 3 questions that I had before I go a little bit deeper into this. The first is, do you think that a shift in human consciousness is possible, moving from self to non-self? Okay, so do you think that's a possibility? If so, what would it look like? What do you think a shift in human consciousness from self to non-self would look like? And what are the conditions that would allow for that? And then the other side of that coin is, what are the conditions that stand in the way of it? So I think that sort of relates to the Bodhisattva path and the paramitas, right? The paramitas are 6 of them. First one is discipline. And the way I remember these, I just go alphabetically. So it's discipline, D, exertion, E, generosity, G, meditation, patience, and wisdom. Okay, that helps. That's a sort of mnemonic for me. So we've spoken about patience, so briefly about discipline. So in the context of the Bodhisattva path, we're talking about these things not in the, partially in terms of the self, like what, discipline, what we need to do to come to sit, to meditate, to use the practice. But the other side of that is the use of the paramitas are really about developing non-self, right? Discipline and all of that is the discipline so that we can move from focusing on ourselves to focusing on non-self, right? So that's sort of the path, and the discipline, so let me talk briefly then, in terms of how that, can work. So first of all, as we all know, Sensei had surgery this past week, back surgery. He had apparently been planning to go on a trip himself with his partner Faye, and in the course of, he's spoken, Sensei has spoken in the past about the fact that he's having back problems and structural back problems, and I mean that, like, with the bone and, impinging on the nerve and all that kind of stuff. And that's just a quality of getting older, right? To a large extent. That's not to say it doesn't happen with younger people, but basically, right as we age, the changes that take place in our body, that sort of manifests itself in, we lose our hearing, we lose our eyesight, or, we have more aches and pains, or our structures change, and that's just part of the nature of being a human being, and what we go through. So the paramitas, in some sense, speak to that too. In the context of Sensei, of course, he was getting ready to go on vacation with his partner Faye, and apparently in the course of packing, and I guess lifting whatever it was, probably, we all know that we pack our suitcases and they get very heavy, and then we have to lift them. And I don't know if that's exactly what happened with him, but he aggravated that back condition. And as a result of that, he was planning to have surgery. I know we've spoken about this, and he had been planning to have surgery. But that was, like I said, it was a plan. So it was going to take place maybe in September or October or whatever he planned it. But we know what happens to plans sometimes. They don't always work out. Circumstances change. And so in the context of Sensei's situation, he had to have emergency surgery, on his back in order to deal with this severe pain that had occurred as a result of the act of getting ready and to go away. So he recently had this surgery, and apparently it was successful. I know I haven't spoken with him directly, but we've had some conversations, and I think that Kathy had spoken with him directly. But in any event, he's at home now. He does have pain as a result of the surgery, and he's going to be going through the therapies. So we're fortunate enough to have various therapies to help us with that. And discipline plays a big part. Discipline. So on the one hand, there's the discipline of going to your therapy and following what the therapist has to say and doing all those things. And I know how difficult it is because, a few years ago I had a partial knee replacement, and it was very painful, to go through that surgery, to go through actually the physical therapy, but eventually, because the body has wisdom and it's able to heal itself, that by using the therapies that have been developed over a long period of time, we're able to get better. So part of it, the discipline is the discipline that we have to bring to it in order to get better, in order to follow the treatment and so forth. And one of the wonderful things I think about physical therapists is they're very encouraging. If you've ever been to physical therapy, it's like having a cheerleader, like, go, you can do this, okay, come on, just a little bit more. And I think, that's a really, really important quality in being a physical therapist. It's not just knowing what you have to do for the body in order to get better, but it's encouraging people to do the right thing for their body and to show up and so forth. And if you don't do that, like I know with the knee therapy, with the knee thing, there's a lot of scarring. So if you do not do the therapy, the scarring, you're not breaking up the scars. And if you're not breaking up the scars, then what happens is you get frozen, and you're not able to recover full use of your knee. In fact, you can make it worse. And then people who don't participate in the therapy will sometimes have to go through the surgery again, in order to break up the scar tissue. So anyway, so with Sensei, I mean, we know he's going to go through therapy, we know he's going to go through medications and so forth. And part of that is the discipline that he brings to it for himself. But the other part of it is the discipline he brings to it in selflessness. In other words, to be able to return here, right? To be able to return here and to teach and to work with people in that way. So the discipline, that we bring to it with it is both for self and non-self. And we practice here, we're practicing both for ourselves, and we have the discipline to sit. It is very important to bring that into the practice, but we're also practicing non-self. In other words, we're practicing to be better people, and so to bring that out into the world so that that has an effect on other people, how we treat them and how we respond to situations and all of that. So the paramitas are a path of practice. Each one of the paramitas is a path of practice to become better, right? To be able to move from self to non-self and to share that teaching and those experiences. And you share the teaching not just by teaching like verbally, but it's by the way you conduct yourself, right? You lead by example. If you just talk about it, it becomes preachy, and people don't like to be preached to. But if you lead by example and they watch it, it seeps in some way into consciousness. It doesn't meet all the obstacles that arise in people's heads if you're trying to teach them something and they're fighting against that because of various reasons, cultural or otherwise. So the practice and the discipline is about showing up for yourself, but also showing up because you're moving from self to non-self. And and you can do that, all the paramitas are sort of aligned in that way. It was very nice, like we were talking before about Sensei's condition, and and we were talking with Mira and Kathy, and Mira says, well, we should send him a basket of fruit. Okay, that's sort of an expression to me of sort of non-self. Carol brings in the flowers, that's sort of an expression to me of non-self. And also I just want to sort of shout out to Jeff Eisenberg and Dion, who are not here today, for the beautiful musical performance that they put on, 2 weeks ago. We hope to have more of that because it's a really great way to build community, and that they offer that. It's an offering. It's the same thing as the teaching. It's the same thing as the flowers. It's the same thing as the fruit. Sending a bowl of fruit. It's an offering you put out there, and this isn't done for money. This isn't done for anything else. It's just done as an offering. Anyway, so that's that part of it. So there's 3 questions that I had asked, 4 actually, for the for the talk, for practice circle. Although of course you can raise anything you want. And just one of the reasons for that, those 4 questions is, I don't know if you have an opportunity to ever look at movies that deal with the future, right? Science fiction films, right? There's so many of them. I was with my brother and we were watching, and there's these science fiction shorts that are on. Every single science fiction short is dystopian. Okay? Try to find a science fiction short that has a positive view of the future, and a path of getting there. I mean, it's all dystopian. And that's kind of sad, right? So I would propose that we have we have a reading group. I suppose we have a writing group. And our focus in the writing group is to create a non-dystopian story of the future. And what that would look like, using whatever benefits of practice. Anyway, so I'm gonna just quickly read something. So the question that I had was, I know we do the Gatha on opening the sutra, and one thing that sort of struck me about the Gatha on opening the sutra is when it talks about that in Gatha, the Dharma is infinitely, profound and subtle, rarely encountered in millions of ages. And what I find fascinating about that line is, let's say, the universe is forever. billions of ages don't really mean anything in the context of the universe as a whole, right? And what I find fascinating about that phrase, for millions of ages, is at some point, you know, at some point, we all die, and eventually the Earth is going to die, and our species is going to die. But the context of the millions of ages is that the Dharma, the underlying teaching of the underlying teachings of ever-changing non-self, exists from the very beginning and will exist to the end. And as different civilizations and species arise in the course of the universe, this will return again and again and again. So it's a fundamental fact of the universe. And so we're in human form. They say you're in human form right now and you have the ability to practice. And whatever human form is, whatever human consciousness is, when we're gone, it may be millions, billions of years, but there will be other human consciousness that arises, and these teachings will arise with them. And probably before we were here, and it doesn't have to be, it could be in the gazillion galaxies that are out there were forms of human consciousness. And it's the exact same Dharma of non-self and impermanence and probably suffering, because I don't know that a dark star suffers, right? But we know they collapse, they go on and so forth. But everything dies. Everything eventually dies. Everything is eventually created. Does that experience suffering? I don't know, but suffering is fundamental to anything any form. Anyway, so I just wanted to briefly read. So it's funny. A lot of people refer to the artificial, I guess the similar way is artificial intelligence, right? So somehow or another we've birthed this thing in the particular context of the time in which we live. And people refer to it as artificial intelligence. I don't really like the phrase artificial intelligence. I don't like the phrase artificial general intelligence, because the term artificial is a very putting off term. So I just like calling it intelligence. It's just intelligence, And we all have intelligence. Intelligence is fundamental to us as people, but some people use intelligence in some way, and some people really, use their intelligence in not so good ways. So I just wanted to, so I asked, so this morning I had a question, I knew I was going to be giving this talk, or a talk. And so the question that you asked is really important, how you phrase your question. So the question that I had was, and I always try to limit it, so I said, in 500 words or less, explain the meaning of the Gatha on opening the sutra. All right. And so it tells me at the very end that it used 480 words to do this. And realize that when you use intelligence, your intelligence is going out and checking all these various sources, and then coming up with a response, And so I'm just going to read briefly. It's rather long, but I'm just going to read, a very short portion of it, and you can do your own, work on it. But I think it's very useful if you want to study something like, I know Carol at some point, I think wanted to study the Diamond Sutra, to ask intelligence, for an explanation of the Diamond Sutra, and you can go deeper and deeper. Intelligence allows you to go deeper and deeper into that question. So the question is, in 500 words or less, explain the meaning of the Gatha on opening the sutra. So it says, so this is the response. The Gatha on opening the sutra is a short verse commonly recited before the reading or chanting of a Buddhist scripture. Its purpose is to cultivate the right state of mind, remind practitioners of the depth of the teaching, and express reverence for the Dharma. And then it goes on and says, a typical version is that the unsurpassed, deep, profound, subtle, and wonderful Dharma is difficult to encounter, even in 100,000 million eons. Now that I am able to see, hear, receive, and uphold it, I gotta fathom the Tathagatha's true and actual meaning. Then it talks about key elements, and I'm not going to go into each detail, but the first element is praise of the Dharma, and then it discusses that. The second element is the rarity of the encounter of the Dharma. The third element is the receiving and upholding the Dharma. So just briefly, receiving suggests opening one's heart and mind to the teaching, while upholding means practicing it sincerely in daily life. The fourth one is the vow of understanding. The fifth one is the meaning and practice. And just briefly, it says the Gatha serves as a mental preparation before approaching a sutra, shifting the practitioner's mindset from distraction or a casual reading of it into a reverence, humility, and openness. And it also reflects the spirit of the Bodhisattva. So there's a lot going on there. And I think it's important to try to understand that. Then the question I had, and I'll just be really brief about this, is, so in 500 words or less, tell me a story about how this sutra came to exist, right? It's good to know, like, what's the origin story? So, again, 480 words. I won't read them all. But I'll read this little bit because I think it's interesting and somewhat important. So it says, long ago in India, after the Buddha's awakening, his disciples preserved his teachings by memory and recitation. When the Buddha spoke, monks would gather in assemblies, listen carefully, and commit his words to heart. Over the centuries, these recited teachings were written down as sutras. They were records of the Buddha's Dharma, or the Buddha's teaching. In time, as Buddhism spread beyond India into China, Korea, and Japan, the act of reading sutras took on a ceremonial role, and monastics and lay people alike came to see the sutra recitation not just as study, but as a sacred encounter with the living voice of the Buddha. And to prepare the mind and the heart, short verses or gathas was composed and added as introductions to practice. The purpose was simple but profound. Practitioners recognized that the Dharma was precious and rare, something not always available in every lifetime, and they wanted a way to remind themselves of this truth before diving into the scripture. Thus, the verse was created as a short prayer of both gratitude and aspiration. So these are qualities. In other words, why am I going through this? I'm going through this because when we just recite it, we just recite it. But when we recognize the qualities behind it, the recitation of it, I think, has a deeper meaning for us. So the last thing I'm going to say about this is, the story goes that a group of monks once prepared to chant the Lotus Sutra. The Lotus Sutra is one of the most revered Mahayana texts, and what we practice is basically Mahayana Buddhism. Their teacher noticed that the younger monks, though diligent, treated the chanting as routine, and he wanted them to approach the words with reverence and awareness. So before beginning, he offered a small verse, praising the Dharma as deep, subtle, and wonderful, reminding them that even across 100,000 million eons, such an encounter was rare. And the verse ended with a vow that by reading and chanting, they would not only study, but realize the Buddha's true intentions. So there's a lot, anyway, there's a lot to unpack in this particular sutra, and I think it's good to sort of be reminded of that from time to time. Again, you're welcome to do your own research on intelligence. Just, the important thing is that be careful, not be careful, but think about the phrase, think about the question that you're going to ask and how it's phrased, and that'll be your answer. In the meantime, I forgot, this is like a gesture, a hand gesture with Buddha like this, right? This particular mudra, and I think it means, it's like it's an accepting mudra, right? It's not a threatening mudra. It's like, come forward and learn. Right? Anyway, give it back to Avalokiteshvara, and maybe somebody can fix it. Thank you.